everybody. It's right around 9 o'clock, and we are excited to get started with you guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is an exciting webinar that we have planned for you guys, and are really looking forward to hopefully getting a chance to answer a lot of your questions and help you guys through the application process. As we go through the webinar, I want to make sure you guys know that we're available for questions throughout the session, and especially at the end when we're going to have a question and answer session. So feel free to use the Q&A button on the GoToWebinar app as we go through the presentation here. So why don't we get started? My name is Dr. Sahil Mehta. I'm from MedSchoolCoach, and with me today I have Dr. Renee Marinelli and Dr. Harvey Katzen, and our goal here today is to take you guys through the medical school application process and understanding how to navigate the system, how to navigate the process, understanding sort of what it's going to take to hopefully get into school. And we're looking to provide hopefully a 1,000-foot view here. As I can see, a lot of you guys are applying next year or applying in the next 2 years, and that's great. So this will give you hopefully a really nice broad overview of the entire process, the timing of the process, what medical schools are going to look for, and how to hopefully separate yourself as an applicant. I think what the most exciting part of this entire presentation is really going to be is towards the end when we get to and look at a lot of basically individual questions from you guys, particularly for myself, for Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Katzen as we go through the process. So I want to sort of start out by introducing myself. So I'm Sahil Mehta, as I mentioned. I founded MedSchoolCoach, and I've been doing admissions sort of consulting and work in the arena for about 10 years now, and I've helped a lot of students kind of through the process, and especially students who are having a difficult time, or students who maybe are reapplicants and have really sort of gotten to know a lot of what goes into a great medical school application and how to help people through. I also have with me Dr. Marinelli, who serves as MedSchoolCoach's Director of Advising. She was a former admissions committee member at UC Irvine Medical School. And Dr. Harvey Katzen, who is a renowned oncologist in the DC area, was a admissions committee member at George Washington University, and now devotes his time to sort of helping a lot of medical school applicants through the process. So, Dr. Marinelli, you just want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'm excited that this webinar will be very applicable to the majority of you who are planning on applying next year, and for the few that are planning on in a few years, hopefully you'll find some information, and those who are actively applying to, about 5% of you are as well. So I think we'll have some good information for everybody out there.
Great. And Dr. Katzen, you want to say hi quickly?
Sure. I'm Dr. Harvey Katzen, and as Dr. Mehta said, I'm an oncologist hematologist, and I worked on the admissions committee at George Washington University for about 25 years, and been working with MedSchoolCoach for a couple of years now, and look forward to working with many of you.
Great. So Dr. Marinelli is going to take us through a lot of the presentation, and then again Dr. Katzen is going to jump in, and I'll give a few words as well, and then at the end we're going to go through a lot of those question answers. So I see some of you have already started asking some questions, which is great. Please feel free to drop in and ask as many questions as you want, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible during the roundtable discussion. So for now, I'm actually going to turn off my own webcam and turn off Dr. Katzen's webcam, as I'm going to have Dr. Marinelli kind of take us through parts of the presentation here.
There we go. Okay, so let's start by just talking a little bit about the whole medical school admissions timeline. So you guys can't see my cursor, but so right now we're kind of in that winter/spring area, and this is, so for a lot of people that are applying now, you may be getting some acceptances, you still may be getting a lot of interviews, and this is really, though, when the people that are planning to apply next year, you should start really thinking about getting ready for your application. So the application actually opens in May of next year, so in 2018, and then you can submit it in June of 2018. And then after that, you'll start receiving secondary applications from each school that you applied to, and then in the summer, you'll receive interviews, and then kind of catching up to where we are now in this application cycle, interviews continue, and you'll be in touch with schools all through the winter and the spring, and then you actually matriculate into medical school the fall of the following year that you submitted your application. So just a quick little overview of how the whole process works, and then we'll kind of go into each little aspect of the application process as we go along. So preparing your application. If you want to zoom in to the next one. Okay, I think it's just kind of going a little slow, but there we go. So probably most people that are preparing right now, you have some idea what you need academically. Obviously, you need a strong GPA, but along with that strong GPA, you need certain courses. So the courses here that I highlighted or I bolded, these are courses that are almost absolutely required across the board for every medical school. And you should have a year of all these courses. Biochemistry, psychology, and sociology, a lot of these are recommended, especially for the new MCAT, but medical schools haven't actually started requiring these yet. But these are the core requirements that you really should start thinking about and should have on your transcript before applying, ideally. And then you can go to the next one. All right, so on top of the coursework, what you really need is a lot of extracurricular activities. So I'm sure a lot of you have a general idea of what you need, but basically you want to have some kind of clinical experience where you're working alongside patients. You want to shadow physicians, and so that's exclusive of working alongside patients is shadowing, where you're actually following a doctor and getting to know some idea of what their day-to-day practice is. Research is pretty much crucial to have when applying to medical school. Ideally, this should be laboratory benchwork science research, and then leadership activities, and this can be anything in your community, in your church, in your school. So get creative here, and then community service as well. So community service, volunteering your time outside of volunteering in a medical setting. So this could be anything in the community, again, Habitat for Humanity, a homeless shelter, things like that, where you're just giving back your service and your time to others. And then on top of that, you'll need some letters of recommendation and the MCAT score, which we'll just talk about next. So probably most of you have heard of the MCAT. Probably a lot of you have taken the MCAT. It's a pretty big deal. The big thing here is to prepare. Take this test seriously, because at your level in undergrad, or even some people that are postgraduate, you're not really used to taking this sort of standardized test. It's pretty grueling because it's so long. It's a very long day, and just the amount of material is just so vast that you really need to take a lot of ample time to prepare and take this seriously, because the score is so important for your entire application. We'll talk a little bit more about some prep courses that can help you. And then the other key about the MCAT is when to take it. So most people will plan on taking it the spring of the year that they're applying. And that's great, because it takes about a month or so for your score to come out. So let's say you take it in April, then your score comes out in May, you submit your application in June, and it's just a really easy process, and everything is ready for your application submission. For some people that absolutely need to wait to take their test because they just feel that they're not ready, you can take it by the end of May and still get your score and be able to submit your application on time as well. And if you have to retake it, unfortunately that does happen to some people, you can retake it the same application cycle. However, you want to make sure you get that second score by midsummer. Otherwise, your application will just be too late during the application process.
Yeah, Dr. Marinelli, I'll jump in here and launch a quick poll,
Awesome.
just to see kind of how many of you guys out there have taken the MCAT so far or not, because that'll give us an idea of where we can help you guys as you progress through the process. So quick vote here. Have you taken your MCAT yet? Quick and easy question. And let's see what the answers are. So it looks like the majority of you actually have not taken your MCAT, and so definitely sort of MCAT planning and MCAT timeline is actually an important thing that often people, I think, overlook, and Dr. Marinelli can certainly speak to this as she already has a little bit, that the MCAT timing is just super important. You want to plan it so that you obviously have an MCAT before your application is due, or if you don't, that you've planned your application around making sure that the MCAT is the last thing to come in. And there's a lot of nuances and subtleties about how to deal with that we can certainly get into into some detail with you about, depending on your exact situation. But bottom line, don't just think about the MCAT as a test that you have to take in the middle of your entire college career here. We really have to think about the timing correctly in order to maximize your score and then eventually maximize your application. So a lot of you have not taken it. We'll give you some tips at the end here for some MCAT studying as well.
Awesome. All right, and so just to kind of hone in on the importance of your MCAT and GPA, not to beat a dead horse, but this is just so crucial to talk about. So this is a table that's put together by the American Association of Medical Colleges each year, and basically it breaks down applicants' MCAT score and GPA versus matriculants, people that are actually going to medical school. So if you click one more time, Sahil, I think it should zoom in to that bracket there. Great. So if you look at where that top arrow is, the average MCAT, and this is the old scoring system, so we would have to update this to new data, but the average MCAT was about a 28 for people that applied, and the average MCAT for people that were getting in is about a 31. So that's somewhere probably like about a 502 for average and about a 508 for matriculants. How it converts to the new scoring system. So you can tell that there's a huge discrepancy there. Those 3 points make a huge difference on if you're going to get in or if you're going to be somebody that just applies. And then you can also see the difference in the GPA numbers too. That bottom GPA, there's a 3.55 for applicants and then a 3.7 for matriculants. So again, quite a big difference there. And that those other GPAs are science, non-science, and then total. So it's just kind of brings the point home again that you really need to be exceptional with your GPA and your MCAT score in order to be competitive amongst the 52,000 applicants, as you can see, that applied to medical school in just that last year.
Yeah, and as Dr. Marinelli is pointing out, just for those of you guys who haven't applied yet, just take a look at these two numbers that I just circled here. 52,000 applicants to medical school in 2015, 2016, and 20,000 of them got in. So you're talking about essentially 4 out of 10 people get into school, which means 6 out of 10 are left out. And so for those of you guys who are pre-meds out there, this hopefully paints the picture of just how competitive the process is. It is such a competitive process, probably the most competitive process in the world when you consider sort of graduate school admissions, when literally 6 out of 10 people who've worked their butt off throughout their entire pre-med careers end up not getting into school. And also the other thing to point out here is if you look, going back in time, the number of applicants every single year has continued to increase. And so the competition, unfortunately, just gets stiffer and stiffer every single year. In fact, if you look just at 2014, the amount of applicants who got in was almost very similar to 2015, but the amount of actual applicants was 3,000 or so more. So just gets more and more competitive every single year that we go through this process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. All right. I think we beat that point enough, so we can go to the next slide. All right, so another aspect of the application is letters of recommendation. And for the people that are planning to apply next year, I would start thinking about this right now. It seems a little early, but just right now, start thinking about who could write your letters of recommendation. So who have you developed a good relationship with in your courses? Who do you think can attest to your character and what kind of work you do and how you'll be as a future physician? So in general, each school, they have their each school has their own individual letters of recommendation requirement, but in general, you'll need 2 from a science professors, 1 from a non-science professor, and then 1 to 2 from like a mentor or somebody that you've done research with or someone you've shadowed, and those will pretty much cover your bases for every school. If you have a pre-medical committee at your school, we recommend you use that as well to group those letters together, and then they'll actually send them off. If you have a pre-health committee, go and talk to them about their letter writing services. Usually a pre-health committee may not be as like organized or may not have the process down as packed as the pre-medical committee. But the key here is asking for these early. So if it's a pre-medical committee or if you're going to approach these letter writers, go and talk to them very early, because when it becomes April, May of next year, when you're about to submit your application, these people get a lot of letter requests, and you don't want your application to be late because you asked them too late or they didn't have it in time. Or the pre-medical committee, I hear this all the time, the pre-medical committee has like a big waiting list to do their interview and put together their letter packet. So make sure you're starting to think about this now and ask somewhere like in February of March of next year.
Yeah, and one thing I'll also point out, as Dr. Marinelli was saying, asking early is super important, but it's also totally fine to ask for more letters and then actually not send as many, or try to get as many letters lined up as possible, and then you can decide later on which letters you actually want to send to medical school. So if you collect 10 letters, you're not going to actually send 10 letters to every single medical school, but you can always collect 5 or 6 letters, and then if a medical school only asks for 3 or 4, just send your 3 or 4 best. It's always better to sort of overshoot and have those letters ready in case you need them, in case a professor falls through, or any of the number of things that honestly happen during the application process. And I'll jump in and just launch a quick poll here about sort of some of the next things that Dr. Marinelli is about to get into. And this poll is basically asking which part of the application process scares you the most as an applicant. So great. Most of you guys have voted now on this question, and so I can share some of these results with the group, and you guys will probably be happy to know that most of you guys are scared of everything across the board. So the things that a lot of people, and this definitely is true, that are very scared about is writing the personal statement and interviews. And actually, Dr. Katzen is probably one of our foremost experts on sort of how to get yourself to perform well on interviews, and I'll open it up to him in a little bit to talk about that. And if you have any specific questions on interviews, please feel free to put it in the Q&A, and then we could talk about it at the end. And then writing the personal statement, obviously something that scares a lot of people as well. And so I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Marinelli here to take us through the rest of this presentation.
Sure. So just a quick note on AMCast. So again, this starts opening for editing in May, and you can submit it the first week of June. Just a reminder to make sure you get those letters of recommendations. Also request your transcripts early. Sometimes schools can go really slow with the transcript request. You can't actually request your transcripts until you open the AMCast in May. So just once you open it, there's a transcript request form in there that you download and you send to the school. I'd recommend doing that right away. And then kind of going off of some people choosing schools, so the number of schools that you do apply to via AMCast really depends on the strength of your application. We recommend usually at minimum somewhere between 25 to 35 schools, and that can be, a little bit more if you want to branch out further and cast a wider net, or maybe just a few less if you have a very, very strong application in certain schools that you want to go to. Again, submit your application as early as possible. That's because schools use something called rolling admissions. So basically that entails that they'll start offering interviews to applicants that get their application in early. So the first people that will get interviews are people that typically have submitted almost June 1st or whenever the application opens at your first submission. So submit it as soon as you can, and then just a reminder that even when you do submit, it does take a few weeks, somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks for the application to process, usually about 4. So if you submit it a little bit later, just be reminded that your application won't be reviewed by medical schools for a few weeks afterwards. So a big part of AMCAS in your application is the personal statement. So as a lot of you noted, this is a pretty big part of the application, and it can be pretty nerve-wracking to write it. So my biggest recommendation in working with so many applicants and reading so many personal statements is try to start early. Start thinking about ideas now. Put things on paper now. Even if they're just bullet points or just thoughts, you can start thinking about it any time. And then in the few months leading up to your application submission, that's where you really want to hone in what you want to write and finalize it. The biggest thing here is trying to make your personal statement unique as possible. An average personal statement probably won't hurt you. You'll probably just be put in the pile of, okay, this person's average. But a great personal statement that really stands out could really help you. And when reviewers are reading it, they'll actually be very interested in you and want to offer you an interview and want to know more about you. So trying to tell your own story in a unique and interesting fashion is just key here. And then also get as much criticism and feedback as you can, because this is a very important document. You want to make sure it's free of spelling errors, any grammar or syntax errors, and you want to make sure you have different people reading it, especially experienced people who've had practice reading medical school personal statements to make sure it is hitting those important boxes of being interesting and unique and telling your own story about why you want to go into medicine, etc. I think we can go to the next one. It's all right. So secondary applications. So secondary applications start coming in usually like 2 weeks to, well, let's even say a week to a month after submitting your primary applications. Sometimes they take a little bit longer. Usually they consist of a few prompts that ask you to write. Sometimes it's a paragraph response, sometimes it's a whole page response, like an autobiography. So the key here is just really trying to prepare and stay organized as much as possible. When these secondaries start coming in, sometimes you can open up your mailbox, your inbox, and get 10 secondaries. And you should submit them ideally sometime within 1 to 2 weeks. So it can be kind of overwhelming to write all these prompts. So what I recommend to applicants is while your application is processing, so you hit submit, takes a few weeks to process, start prepping these prompts. We put our partner website, Prospective Doctor, down there. They have all the prompts from the medical school's last year's secondaries, and medical schools tend to repeat the secondary prompts. So really just get started as early as possible and then just have those ready to go. So when you do get a secondary, you can review what you wrote briefly and then submit it. And that's going to really show your interest in that school and the motivation to do the work that they're asking of you.
Yeah, awesome. And I just want to put a quick plug in for Prospective Doctor. For those of you guys who have not actually been there, it's an awesome little website that has all kinds of free information, all kinds of great articles, and we have the secondary database and some tools up there, and we're going to actually expand it even more. So it is really a great resource. If you have not gone there, go perspectivedoctor.com. You're going to find all kinds of great articles, all written by actual people on admissions committees and giving you tips about pre-med life, application, even medical school. So check it out at some point, because I think you're going to find a lot of really useful information on there as you go through the process, and it's all completely free to look at.
Awesome. So let's move on to the last step of the application process, and that's the interviews. And again, I'm saying it's a very important aspect of the application. I know that I keep saying that about everything, but really it truly is. I mean, each piece of the application really completes the whole picture that medical schools get to see about you. So the interview is really essential because so far they see that you look great on paper. They've seen your primary, your secondary application. They think, wow, this person could be a good medical student. We like them. Let's invite them to see who they are. And the key to the interview here is to really showcase your personality and your ability to communicate with others, to convince them that not only does this person look like they'll be a good doctor, I know they're going to be a good doctor because of the way that they interact with others. And the interview is your time to tell that story. The key here, again, is preparation and practice. So you're going to, whenever you get that first interview invite, you'll want to sit down, read about interviews, read about what types of questions they ask, especially the multiple mini interview. Read about tons of different techniques for these, and then sit down with somebody that has practice interviewing pre-medical students and get feedback and critiques on how to improve your interviewing style. It's definitely something to be taken seriously. It's not usually just like a interview for, you know, a side job or something like that. This is a pretty serious interview, so you want to make sure that you practice very well for it. And then afterwards, this is just a little note that not too many of you need to worry about right now, but make sure you send thank you letters to your interviewees because it's very important to follow up. And then the last part of it, Dr. Mehta, if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so the post-interview. So this is the waiting game. So basically you can end up with 3 decisions. You can get accepted, which is awesome. However, probably most people end up on a hold or a wait list, and then the third decision is you get rejected after an interview. The point here is don't be discouraged if you get on a hold or a wait list. It's really just important for you to keep in contact with schools, check your email frequently, make sure you're checking your junk inbox as well, because a lot of people get in off of the hold or the wait list. Some schools that they say that they accept 50% of their class off of the wait list. So if you end up one of those people that are just on multiple wait lists or even on one, just make sure that you're really involved in keeping that school updated, because there's a great chance that you will get an admission from that hold. I think that's going to pretty much wrap up my little talk here. I'll hand it back over to Dr. Mehta to talk about a little bit about MedSchoolCoach and how we can help you in this whole process.
Sure. So that sort of took you through an overview of the actual process. And before I hand it over to Dr. Katzen for some insight that he can give in terms of the mistakes he's seen or the tips he has, I just wanted to put a quick plug in for sort of what we do at MedSchoolCoach. So we help students through the application process from start to finish, as early as freshman year of college, all the way through medical school and beyond. So our real expertise comes in sort of when you're thinking about the actual application process. For the majority of you, that's going to be this upcoming year, and that's the perfect timing. So we work with students as early as September, October for the following year, and we help them sort of develop their application, figure out what to write about in the personal statement, really seeing if there's any holes that they need to fill in, figuring out what the best plan in terms of number of schools, the actual schools to apply to, basically everything that is involved. And sort of everybody you work with at MedSchoolCoach is a physician who's been on an admissions committee, so that sort of really paints the picture of, listen, we know what we're talking about. We sort of have seen both sides of things in a pretty good format. So I encourage you to check out the website and see if there's information on there, or if you want more information, you can always contact us from there. So we've been doing this now for about 10 years, and we've had a pretty damn good success record, I got to say, of people getting into school. So hopefully we can help you along. And again, we help with sort of all different aspects of the application process, whether it's personal statements, secondaries. We also do USMLE tutoring, interview prep, etc. Before I get to these other slides, I wanted to kind of bring Dr. Katzen in for a second and get his sort of insight on, you know, what he thinks some of the mistakes that he's seen people make in the application process, and how basically people can be better applicants from his perspective.
First of all, thank you, Drs. Marinelli and Mehta, and let me, you know, a lot of the comments that I'd like to make really re-emphasize what Dr. Marinelli says. I am a planner, and to get through the application process, you have to be devoted to the process, and it starts early. I think at this stage, at the early stages, for those who are not in the current application cycle, you have to begin to think about who the recommenders will be. If you wait, the people that will be doing the recommending are going to be quite busy, and they're going to be overloaded with a lot of other applicants. First of all, they may not have time, and second of all, they may write something faster than you wish they had. Secondly, and again, it was sort of re-emphasizing some of the points that the other two physicians made. The personal statement, I think, is an area of tremendous importance on the application. And I think, as you understand from what we do at MedSchoolCoach, we think of the application as an entirety, and there's a strategy to it. We want to present you in the best way, or you want to present yourself in the best way you can. Some of that will be presented in the personal statement, but some of that will be presented in accurately or carefully choosing what you tend to emphasize in the activities section, and which in the activities section, which you can do 15 on the AMCAS application, and 3 of them you can write a longer paragraph about, and you want to choose those carefully so they're showing as many aspects of you, and they don't all have to be about science. We want to know you're an interesting person. If I were to talk about some of the greatest errors that I see beyond timing and starting late and starting the process late, I hate to say it, but I think it's carelessness, spelling errors in the application, and grammatical errors. As somebody who was charged with being part of a committee reading 10 to 15,000 applications a year to seat a class of 175, I can tell you that if we read a personal statement that was boring in the first couple of sentences, it probably would not have been read. And if we saw obvious errors of spelling or punctuation, that's looked upon as lazy and careless, and that definitely has a negative effect on your overall evaluation. You know, one of the other points I'd like to make, if I could, and that is in terms of the interview. In the interview, most of the people that I have seen, both as an interviewer and as a coach over the last couple years, I recommend you do not try to memorize a speech or memorize paragraphs. I recommend that you use bullet words to get across the thoughts that you want to express about yourself. If I interrupt you during an interview, if you get nervous during an interview, your speech will be very difficult to get back to and to get to the right place. Whereas if you know, hey, I want to talk about I was on the tennis team, or I want to talk about I play the guitar, or maybe I want to talk about research. You've lived it, you've done it, you did the research. Nobody needs a paragraph to remember things about themselves, and they need words. I think my main points are start early, be very careful about what you do, use the tools that are available to you, spell check, grammar check, and have somebody that has experience read your personal statement. Is it interesting? Does it keep my attention? Is it boring? Is it trite? And does it really present you in the best way that you can be presented? And the last point I'd like to make, and Dr. Marinelli showed a slide early on that showed, and this all goes into planning and early preparation, is there's more to the applicant than a GPA and an MCAT, and I think the 3 of us that are before you this evening will tell you we've all seen applicants with 4.0s and 520s and on the current score of the MCATs that haven't gotten in, and sometimes the weakness is in the way they presented themselves in the application, and sometimes if you look back at the sort of recommended or numbers of hours we're looking for of research and community service and evidence of leadership. And the sad part is sometimes the applicants have those hours, but they don't know to accentuate them in various parts of the application. And for those that are certainly in the beginning of the junior or even the end of the sophomore year, my feeling is, as an admissions officer, I really don't like to see 150 hours of volunteer service done in one semester right before you're going to apply. This again goes to planning ahead. You want to see somebody who clearly is altruistic and who has been volunteering and doing service opportunities over a period of time. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Drs. Marinelli and Mehta.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Katzen. Obviously, Dr. Katzen's insight for 25 years of being on a admissions committee is it's just invaluable. Before we get to the Q&A session, I wanted to talk just quick about a tool that we've partnered with that I think may be helpful for a lot of you guys excuse me, who are going through the MCAT process. It's a tool called CramFighter, and basically it's a study scheduling tool. And so you can go on there and kind of say, hey, I am studying for the MCAT. Here are the resources I have. And it doesn't matter if it's Kaplan, it doesn't matter if it's Spencer Review, it doesn't matter if it's Khan Academy, it doesn't matter what it is. Basically, you just plug in the resources that you have. You plug in when your MCAT date is, and it's kind of it's going to allow you to spit out a study schedule planned out to the day. So I think this is very helpful, particularly for those of you who are early on in the process or just kind of a little bit lost on how to get started in studying for the MCAT. I think this is an invaluable tool for a lot of you guys, and honestly, it's very cheap. I think up to, if you want it for an entire year, it's $100, and I think it's well worth it because it'll allow you guys to really plan out your study schedule, again, day by day. You can even do things like say, I missed a session, and it will make sure to remind you again to do that, or reshuffle your schedule, or change your test date. Has all kinds of great functionality. So I would check it out. I would encourage you guys to check it out. Again, from the MedSchoolCoach side, if you guys have any questions or want to check out our website or give us a call or shoot us an email anytime, feel free. We are here to kind of answer your questions and help you through the process of applying to medical school. So now I want to kind of get to, I think, what's usually the funnest part of these webinars, and allow everybody out there to sort of ask questions of us. And we unfortunately can't get to every question, but we'll try to pick out a bunch of different questions and kind of go through a couple of answers with you, and hopefully this will give you guys a good starting process on how to approach the medical school application. So I'm going to just start firing questions, and I'll bounce them off myself, Dr. Marinelli, and Dr. Katzen, and kind of we can go from there. So there's a question, Dr. Katzen, I'll turn this one over to you, that says, as a freshman in college, what should I do to start thinking about my application, and how do I make myself a competitive applicant?
This, I think, goes directly to one of the early slides that Dr. Marinelli showed. And I think, number one, I think that you need to concentrate on your studies, on your grades. You want to maintain a GPA. And even though we feel the other parts of the application are important, if you don't have the appropriate grades and ultimately MCAT scores, you can't compensate by the other portions of the application. However, if possible, I recommend people start getting involved in volunteering, looking around early on for what is available for research, and trying to figure out how they will show themselves in some form of leadership. Leadership can be something as simple as mentoring an elementary school person, or leadership can be captain of the football team, or leadership can be shown by being an officer or an active member, even in a sorority, etc. I think that type of planning really should start as early as possible. Secondly, whether you need help or not, I think it's important to be mindful of what is your study schedule and what are your needs. We, as Dr. Mehta mentioned, we actually start with occasionally high school students, but certainly freshmen in college. And when we see that they're struggling in the early semesters, that, you know, somebody that was top of their class in high school, all of a sudden they go to college, biology is difficult or chemistry is difficult, sometimes they're at a loss. And I think that there's always resources available, whether it's going to the professor after hours, whether it's going to the teaching assistant, but you need to figure out how to avail yourself of resources that are available. The more contact you have with professors, whether it's a freshman chemistry professor, the more contact you have with situations in which you're volunteering or you're shadowing, the more chance you'll be able to get those strong letters of recommendation that Dr. Marinelli mentioned earlier. You know, getting a letter of recommendation that just says you were there isn't a particularly helpful letter. You want somebody that can attest to your character, attest to your work ethic, maybe even attest to how you surmounted various challenges when your experiments didn't go well. You didn't quit and you kept going on. So I think those are some of the points I would make in answer to that specific question.
Great. Dr. Marinelli, I'll ask this question of you, which is a fairly open-ended or broad question, but maybe you can give us some insight into what makes a unique personal statement.
A great question. So, and everybody that you'll talk to has a little bit of a different opinion about this, but I think from reading so many personal statements, I can really echo what Dr. Katzen said, that unless you catch the reader's attention in those first few lines, more than likely they'll skim through it for any red flags and put it aside. But if you can start with an interesting opening paragraph that really catches someone's attention and makes them interested and want to keep reading about you, that is a huge key to your personal statement. And so the start of your personal statement is where you want to spend probably the majority of your time writing. So how to make that interesting, how to make that unique. It can be an anecdote. It can be a sentence that maybe catches somebody off guard. Try not to be very average or the very common thing, like I wanted to be a doctor since I was 5 years old. Try to have something that maybe somebody's not expecting to read off the top at the start of a personal statement. And then the rest of the personal statement, I really recommend having kind of people tell their own unique story about kind of the process of what brought them to medicine, some of the things that they've done that really substantiate their desire and their ability to practice medicine one day, and then close it all together. Whether or not you want to know or you believe it, everybody has somewhat of an interesting story. I had no idea I had like an interesting background or, you know, like at all, but as I've grown up, I've realized, wow, I could have put that in my personal statement. That's kind of interesting, or these kinds of things are pretty cool characteristics about me or of experiences I've had in the past. So really it takes a lot of insight into your own character, and then also having somebody look in from the outside. And I think that's one great thing our advisors do, is that you send us tons of information about you, and our advisors can say, hey, you know, this is really interesting. I've never met anybody that's done this, or really, why don't you talk about this, because this really shows your resiliency and your perseverance, or things like that. So trying to have somebody else look at your own experiences in your own life to find out what is unique and interesting about you, because sometimes it's hard to figure out what those things are when you're just kind of thinking about it yourself.
Great, thank you. There's a bunch of questions on the MCAT out there in terms of studying and how to approach it. So there's a question that says, can I prep for my MCAT during freshman year? And I'll take a stab at this one. And I think the answer is yes, absolutely, but probably not in the way that you're thinking. So I 100% do not recommend signing up for a prep course, even getting review books in your freshman year of college for the MCAT. It's way too early to start thinking about that. You're probably a good 3 years off, maybe even 4 years off from when you actually will take the MCAT. However, the actual best preparation for the MCAT, bar none, is taking college-level classes and doing well in those classes. So biology and chemistry and physics, does not change. The fundamentals of that, if you can perform really well in your undergrad classes, that's going to be the best studying that you can do for your MCAT. So getting that really solid foundation in your freshman and sophomore year through your pre-med science classes is 100% MCAT studying. Now, once you get to maybe your summer sophomore year and then early junior year, and your MCAT is maybe 6 months to a year away, then you could start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do for a prep course? What am I going to do for review material? What am I going to do for a study schedule? But before then, really sort of just doing really well in the process of your undergrad classes is absolutely the best studying you can do.
Absolutely.
Dr. Katzen, I will throw this question at you, which is an interesting question. I think probably has a very easy answer, but we'll answer it anyway. Can having a GPA that's too high hurt my chances of acceptance?
The only reason I would think that an unusually high GPA could hurt somebody is if you achieve the GPA by not making yourself a well-rounded person and you didn't participate in other activities. You know, one of the things that we look for when we interview people and coach them is, are you an interesting person? You know, one of my points that I usually make is the fact that you were invited for an interview is great. You passed that first metric of the application, the GPA, the MCAT. Now today, the day of your interview, I want to know if you're interesting. Have you done things? And it's okay to tell me you like to do yoga or you like to play tennis or you're an artist. I mean, if I could give one quick anecdote, this past season I interviewed a very shy young lady on Skype who had great difficulty talking, and I spent a lot of time speaking with her and found out she was an artist. I said, show me some of your artwork. Bottom line is she took a piece of her artwork to her interview. Not only did the interviewer want to buy a piece of it, he accepted her on the spot. So the point is you want to be an interesting person. You want to be somebody who is more than just a statistic, a GPA. You know, as I always say, I want to know that I have a physician that can talk to people who may not be as educated as you are and may not be as intelligent. Sometimes I've had to break the ice or enjoy breaking the ice talking to somebody for a few minutes about college basketball, and they're relaxed, and then all of a sudden they're talking to me as though we're on the same level, and you get more information. The point of a great GPA is you'll see as you know, Dr. Marinelli and Mehta and I can show you. We look at a total applicant, and the GPA and MCAT is only one tab on about a 10 to 12 tab spreadsheet. It's a very important one, but we need something more than just a really smart person if we want to accept them to medical school, and more importantly, if we think they're going to be a good physician.
Awesome, amazing. Dr. Marinelli, I will throw this question at you, which is essentially about secondary applications, which is definitely a time when a lot of people get bogged down. But the question is basically, how long does the average applicant spend on secondary applications?
That's a great question. I've seen some people, and I've worked with a lot of applicants that turn them around within a few days, and then I've had people hold on to them for a couple months. I would try to shy away from being the latter. I would say you could plan on, if you don't have a huge schedule and maybe it's summertime, so maybe you're not taking courses, or maybe you're not committed to a ton of extracurricular activities and you can really try to just knock these out as fast as possible, I think you definitely can aim for a week turnaround, and that's completely reasonable, especially if you prepare. If you put them off, they will build up, and then it's just kind of like a snowball effect where you're going to have more and more secondaries to do. It's going to take you longer and longer. So that's why I recommend just to prepare as much as you can while you're waiting for those to come in, because the faster you can get them in, I mean, you don't want to turn them in like the same night. You want to show admissions committees that you actually took some time to work on it. So that's why I suggest that some people say 3 weeks, 1 to 3 week, that's totally fine, turnaround time. Anything past there, then you're kind of really putting out the message that maybe you aren't too motivated for this school or your interest is a little low. So I don't know if that answered the average turnaround time, but hopefully that kind of helps talk about how you should turn around and how you should approach it.
Great. Dr. Katzen, here's a question that basically says, how many clinical hours do I need, and how many doctors should I be shadowing?
First of all, let me talk about the second part first. I don't think it's so much the number of physicians that you shadow. I think it's more about the quality and the ultimate number of hours that you shadow. Sometimes a shadowing experience may or may not be good, and you might want to shadow another physician, or you may be shadowing for the purpose of finding out, gee, what fields of medicine may I be interested in? I don't think the number of physicians is quite as important. I usually think that somebody has shadowed somewhere between 20 to 50 hours is probably a good number. You know, you don't want to accept somebody to medical school who watched ER or Grey's Anatomy and thinks that would be a really neat thing to do with their life. You want to get somebody that understands what it is to be a physician. Maybe you've had an ER or an operating room experience, or maybe you've had experience in an office. We want as an admissions officer to know you understand what the field of medicine is. It's not necessarily a 9-to-5 job. It may be tense, and I don't think you really get an appreciation for that unless you've been in someone's office. And again, I don't think it's the number of physicians, although it's fine if you stay with one physician and obviously develop a good relation and maybe even get to see or possibly even do more. It's more to me that it wasn't a one-time, one-half semester, you got a bunch of hours in. To me, I'd like to see there's been a commitment of interest over a period of time. And I would say somewhere between 20 and 50 hours.
Great. Dr. Marinelli, here's a question for you. There's a lot of actually, it looks like non-traditional students out in the audience, and they have questions on, number one, can we help them? Which I'll tell you quickly, the answer is absolutely. We have a ton of non-traditional students every single year, including non-traditional advisors who've taken non-traditional pathways to medical school. But I guess the overall question is sort of, what does a non-traditional student have to do a little bit differently than a traditional student who's going straight from college?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say, you know, just echoing Dr. Katzen's point that he made earlier about showing that you are an interesting person and you have interest outside of just school and research and work. That part of applying is so essential, and as a non-traditional applicant, you usually can really show that very, very well in your application. So I think being a non-traditional student, don't let that bog you down or get you worried that you're not going to get in. I think that you can actually really use those experiences no matter what they were, if they were in business or nursing or anything. You can really use those different experiences to your advantage when you're applying to medical school. However, even for non-traditional students, you still have to have some of those core things that most pre-medical coming right out of college students have. So again, those courses that we talked about, you still have to have those prerequisite courses. If they're done a while ago, that's okay, but you need to make sure that you have those courses. And then the MCAT is required for any applicant, unfortunately, so you have to make sure that you are taking MCAT and hopefully getting a competitive score. And then I would say, depending on your different experiences and what you did before you're applying to medical school, you maybe don't need to check those extracurricular activities by the box. So maybe you don't need like a designated leadership experience because perhaps you were you know, an executive in your previous career. So that's kind of leadership activity as it is. So you don't need to like go and, you know, become a student body member at your college or something like that, because you've already had this kind of more real life experience that they'll be looking at. However, I do think clinical experience is absolutely essential no matter what career you're coming from. Some shadowing, so at least like you were saying, Dr. Katzen, you have some experience knowing what a physician does. And the other thing I've seen a lot of non-traditional students struggle with is research. So I think research, again, is pretty essential for applying to medical school, so I would recommend for those non-traditional students to try to find research opportunities. It's definitely harder for you than the traditional undergrad, but I do recommend at least trying as hard as you can to get some kind of position, and a lot of non-traditional students will go into clinical research, which I think is a great option for them. So you can really tailor your application to your own experiences, but there are those certain kind of prerequisite courses and prerequisite extracurricular activities that you do need to have when you apply.
Awesome, great. So we're actually coming up on 10 o'clock here on the East Coast, and so we're about an hour in. So typically this is when we try to wrap up because we don't want to keep people too long. There are a lot of great questions out there, and I wish we had the time to answer every single one of them. I really do. However, what we will certainly try to do is, post some answers to these questions, as well as I think you can find a lot of answers to these questions on things like Prospective Doctor, as well as additional articles that we'll write. And we're coming up with a podcast soon as well that I think we can go through a lot of these questions on. So look out for all those things in your emails and on our websites, MedSchoolCoach and Prospective Doctor. For those of you guys who are going to be applying this year, there's actually a question out there that says, how do you choose a advisor and through the process? And there's a lot of different companies, and there absolutely are, and there's a lot of great companies out there. There's a lot of great people who are doing good advising work. Obviously we think that choosing an advisor is important, despite having, if you even have a pre-med advisor in college who may be good, getting a second set of eyes and getting somebody who's really focused in on medicine and can get to know you as an applicant really well, I think is an imperative part of the process, particularly because pre-med advisors at colleges may be working with pre-law students and pre-business students and who knows what else, and they may have 40 to 70 other pre-meds, if not more than that as well, that they're trying to look through. So getting the experience of a one-on-one advisor, I think, really helps your application shine. And then a couple of things to look for in the different companies that are out there is, do they focus only on medicine? That's something that we do. We only do medicine. Everybody here is a physician who's been through the process, and so this is all we do. This is what we specialize in, and so I think we do it exceptionally well. If you look and see our prices and see other competitors' prices, there's certainly a lot of disparities and discrepancies out there, but you really have to think about, okay, what am I getting? Am I getting somebody like Dr. Katzen who's had 25 years of experience on admissions committees, or am I getting a medical student, or am I even getting somebody who has never even been in medicine, who's a guidance counselor who may be editing essays, who may do a great job of editing an essay, but do they really have that sort of extra insight into what it takes to get into medical school that hopefully we can provide. And we can go through additional details of sort of the differences between ourselves and other companies out there at any time if any of you guys are interested. But bottom line is, I want to really thank all of you guys for tuning in tonight. I certainly hope that the information we provided here was helpful. It was meant to give you a broad overview of the process, and there are so many details and nuances that each and every one of you have asked on the forum, which I think are great questions, but unfortunately we just don't have time to get to every single one of them. But I think it hits home the point that this is really actually a personalized process, and really a process that if you can make yourself shine or find somebody who can help make your activities shine, you're really going to, it's going to go a long way for you. Remember, 6 out of 10 people who are applying, aren't getting in. And a lot of those have maybe the same numbers as the people who are getting in. So it's about how you present yourself as an applicant, how you interview. And those are the things that we can really help with. Again, I want to thank all the participants for tuning in tonight. There will be a recording of the webinar which will be sent out, and slides as well which will be sent out, so check your email for those. And I really want to thank Dr. Katzen and Dr. Marinelli for their time. They are here to sort of give back to all you guys and impart all their wisdom for many number of years and thousands of students that they've worked with. And we're really here to try to get you guys into and through medical school, because it's a great profession at the end of the day, and something that I think if you're interested in, you definitely want to obviously you want to pursue. So thank you guys again. for joining. And again, we will be sending out emails in the next couple of days with some recordings. And if for those of you guys who have more specific questions or want more specific help, please contact us. Hit up the website, MedSchoolCoach.com, and we can go from there. So thank you again, Dr. Katzen. Thank you again, Dr. Marinelli. And good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.